Thank you, Amelia. I really appreciate it, and want to thank Educational Alliance for putting this together. Um, Senator Capito, Senator Manchin, I know starting off talked a lot about the access and the speed testing and equity issues. And for those of you that don't know, Senator Manchin, Senator Capito from day one have been just, I want to use the word extremely helpful, and that's not going to do it justice. What they've done during this time of crisis for the state of West Virginia is unbelievable. And, I've had a long-standing relationship with Senator Manchin and his wife, Gail Manchin. And I was glad to hear Senator Manchin speak of the five promises for education, because even back when we were working with Gail Manchin, we talked a lot about taking care of our children, the health of our children, nutrition, wellness. And I'm going to weave that in today because it really does need to be discussed as we talk about this technology gap and issue on equity and access. I also want to thank Rob Hinton. He has been absolutely amazing to work with from the Broadband Council and has been so responsive from the education standpoint to Chancellor Tucker and myself, knowing that we are having some serious issues around the K-12 and higher education equity issue. So I want to start with talking a little bit about where we're at and what's happened since March 13th when we closed the schools down. Having 55 independent districts and kind of piggybacking on what we've heard from the previous three speakers, we knew the day that we closed schools, we were going to have an equity issue. However, with that being said, it should go without saying, actually, we need to thank our teachers, our educators and service personnel during this time have stepped up in just amazing ways. Those that have not had the level of access have found creative and innovative ways to connect to their students when they can. They have gone above and beyond during this time to engage our students, but engage is what I'm going to focus on. Because of the lack of equity and the lack of access, we found very, very quickly during the first several weeks, we were not going to be able to continue at a level of instruction. Instead, we would have to shift to this idea of engagement as best we could, because it was within weeks, we found that the equity and access was just so diverse across the state. We've spent so much time over the last decade ensuring that each one of our schools have broadband access. And we talk about public education being the great equalizer, that no matter where you come from, anywhere in West Virginia, no matter how poor, how wealthy, how rural, how urban, public school is the great equalizer. And I believe that wholeheartedly until this crisis. We've expected public education to expand and move beyond the bricks and mortars of the schools. We've expected that learning continue outside of the public schools, and we see that more and more. And the question now becomes, is public education, is it going to continue to be the great equalizer if we cannot tackle this issue of equity and access for all? And I actually want to use a story of three students we've been able to track for the most part during this time period. And all three of these students are actually from middle school across the state. They're all three cousins. They have mothers that are able to talk about their experiences. And the first student that I'd like to talk about is a young lady. It's in 7th grade, and her name's Elizabeth. Elizabeth struggled in school. She struggled during public school before March 13th. When March 13th happened and they shifted to remote learning, this particular school and area that Elizabeth lives in, access. The streaming capacity and connectivity to the school was very adequate. She attended a school that did one-to-one devices. She was able to leave on March 13th to take a device home. On March 16th, her teachers never missed a beat. They actually were able to connect to her, keep her engaged. They were able to check in on her. She received ongoing messages and communication from the school, from the principal. As a matter of fact, even daily routines were kept in place. Elizabeth experienced the last 6 to 7 weeks, her experience has been very, very different than some. In fact, I do believe she still logs on every morning with her principal to say the Pledge of Allegiance. Her connectivity to the school and community has just been amazing. She's actually done much, much better during this time period of being remote learning during a pandemic. She's excelled. Her cousin, however, His name is Gabriel. Gabriel attends a school in a pretty affluent area. Access is spotty. He actually found that he was one of the children we heard Senator Capito and Senator Manchin discuss that would have to leave his home if he wanted to connect or do any type of homework, and did not have a device, did not have a computer from school. He did have a phone, and he's done as much as he could on his cell phone, but he had to do it by driving to a local elementary school that they allowed to open up and become a hotspot for the community. I will tell you that within the first couple of weeks, Gabriel got very, very frustrated, began to pull back from his assignments. It became very cumbersome for the family to continue driving there on a regular basis for him to have access. It was a very, very different experience. In fact, I do believe that he ended up doing much of just the minimal requirements to turn whatever he needed to turn in on. The third student is a student by the name of Josh. Josh, we were able to stay pretty close with during the fall and early spring semesters. He is another student that's at risk, relied on the school for a lot of supports. In fact, relied on the school for a lot, everything from after-school tutoring and engagement. Thank goodness for sports and the extracurricular activities. He got there early and he stayed late. It was the centerpiece of his entire life. I will tell you that reaching out to the school where Josh is, there is no access. We have talked to the teachers about how their level of engagements are. They have seen him once a week for the last 4 to 5 weeks during meal pickups, where he will pick up 5 days worth of meals. They tried early on to exchange some paper pencil materials to engage Josh, but they are now beginning to work with counselors and social workers and others a little closer, because he has not been there for the last 2 weeks during meal drop-offs. The reason that becomes very important, that these 3 at-risk students that we know we talked to during the fall through other initiatives, these are 3 very, very different experiences during the pandemic. And because of the lack of access of equity, devices, affordability, quality, everybody from March 13th since this started has heard me continually talk about one caring adult being able to reach out and keep these children engaged. And I'll go back to the way I started. If public education is supposed to be the great equalizer, if we do not solve this issue of equity and access, then I don't know how we can continue to say that when we expect education to take place outside of the traditional bricks and mortar. So I worry about these students. I am thrilled to death for Elizabeth, who has excelled during this time period. I understand Gabriel's frustrations of access, and he wants to. I feel bad that he has backed off through that frustration period. And I worry about Josh and who will reach out and who will connect to him, because I don't know who that person will be if we can't reach him. And I have commissioned a reentry task force. We are pulling together I think we're up to 40 or 50 partners across the state and national partners who are coming together to join us to look at reentry and recovery. And I will tell you, technology is right at the top of that reentry task force. Our teachers are usually prepared for what a summer slide or achievement gap looks like, but we are preparing our teachers and school systems to not only be prepared for an even wider achievement gap. We've heard stories in the past during flooding and, for example, Katrina, where it took New Orleans up to 2 years to even try to, get back to where they were prior to the flood when it comes to the achievement gap. We're also preparing our teachers for the social and emotional gap, child nutrition, special education, our safe schools and facilities. But again, technology will be at the heart of all this. So I'll end with this has to be a priority. We've heard Senator Capito, Senator Manchin, Rob Hinton. We've heard the governor and his staff talk about equity and access for broadband. But for the Department of Education, we know that our teachers are doing everything they can, but it is essential that we tackle this as soon as possible.
Thank you so much, Superintendent Burch, for sharing the stories of the 3 students and their different experiences during this pandemic. And you addressed this in your story of the 3 students, but our first question is from a teacher from Berkeley County, and she has mentioned that students with both device and internet have continued to move forward, while those without had an initial paper packet, but there has not been a lot of teacher follow-up or additional learning assignments. What is your plan to ensure all students have affordable access to internet in their homes in the near future?
Well, I'll tell you that it'll be priority for, you heard our senators talk about this. I think that Rob Hinton, the Broadband Council, governor, and his staff, they're all talking about how important they found that this is going to have to be priority. But affordability is interesting because there will be a point in time where we reach access for all, but will it still be equitable? If the affordability is not there and our students don't have the devices, it does continue to make it access or equitable access a little more difficult. So we have superintendents out in the field. I will use Doddbridge County as an example. He has taken upon himself to connect some of these dots, to work with the USDA, local businesses, and his Board of Education to ensure next year every student in his county has both access and a device. I think we're going to see several districts step up to tackle this, but I think we have to be prepared as a state to support them as they do.
Great, thank you so much. And you mentioned a reentry task force, which is very encouraging to hear that that's already being discussed. And with that, what can educators and families do to help their communities improve broadband?
I think that even for calls such as this that the Education Alliance is sponsoring, I thought, even in my own role, that I knew a lot about broadband, but being part of and being able to engage with folks like Rob Hinton, the senators, the USDA, we're finding that I think education is quite important here. I think we all need to become a little more educated. You heard both our senators talk about the mapping and hearing that our access is great, it's in the 90th percent, but I will agree with both of them. We know that's a farce, and we know that the access is nowhere near where we thought it was or where people claim it is. So I think that education is going to be key. I think we need to all learn as much as we can about that. I was glad to hear all 3 of the speakers talk about the speed test. That becomes very, very important. Otherwise, access without quality will be a very, very frustrating issue for our students and our teachers.
Great, thank you so much. And our final question for Superintendent Burch for the day is, what is the plan for the reopening of the school system in the fall?
Well, I get asked that pretty much on a daily basis. School calendars, we're not asking them to address the school calendar. We're going to work closely with Secretary Crouch and Dr. Slint, Clay Marsh, to continue through the summer to monitor every other piece of our state opening. We are going to be very cautious and cognizant of any issues. We will have contingency plans as part of this reentry task force. We are learning some lessons around the nation of reopening schools and doing some hybrid attendance and enrollment. But right now, we're going to focus on wrapping up this year, celebrating our seniors of 2020, figuring out how we can best support our students this summer. And we hope by early June that our task force will have some of those recommendations for the fall up and ready for the Board of Education.
Great. Thank you so much again, Superintendent Burch, for sharing these important initiatives and also for your leadership during these unprecedented times. We truly appreciate you joining us today.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. And